I don't need to tell you that there's a time for work and a time for rest, that life follows a beautiful rhythm ever since God set the tone on the first page of the Bible, when He rested on the seventh day, when He tells us throughout the Bible that we're to rest and recharge regularly. Then He gave us the moon in the evening just to set some limits on how much time we would spend out in the field sweating and trying to get ahead of the other farmer. And I don't need to tell you that rest can take a lot of different forms, as can work, the flip side of the coin. Over the past months, many of us have stayed home, remained in our pajamas, and gone to the workplace or the school less than ever before. But was that rest? Not while we worried about our health, our economy, our jobs. It's possible to be stressing ourselves out while supposedly at rest, and resting while we're supposedly at work. Rest takes discipline like anything else. You turn off the cell phone. You unplug your worry circuits. It takes concentration and, yes, a little work just to rest, to give mind, soul, and body a break. Here's what Jesus said: "Come to me, all you that are weary and are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest." We all love that one. He says, "I will give you rest." But then, have you noticed what comes next? "Take my yoke upon you." That's what you tell an ox or a mule just before you put them to work. He says, "My yoke is easy and my burden is light." If I didn't know Jesus better, I'd think I was being conned into something, right? What's this thing all about? Is it my yoke is easy, or is it pick up your cross and follow me? What does Jesus mean when He talks about rest? As we've studied Mark, one of the things I've tried to stress is the sense of urgency in this particular gospel. The word immediately is used 27 times. Jesus is baptized, and immediately the Spirit drove Him into the wilderness. Immediately He called the fishermen. Immediately they left their nets and followed Him. Everybody in Mark is in a big hurry. Maybe that's why we're kind of surprised to see the passages about rest. There are several passages with a stress on Jesus being pushed to His limits by the crowds and needing to withdraw with the disciples for rest. Mark says a couple of times they didn't even have a chance to eat. And at one point, when Jesus attempts to escape the crowds in a boat on the Sea of Galilee, they actually hurry around the upper perimeter and meet Him on the other side. Today's passage is taken from two sections of Mark 6, just before and just after the real excitement, when He feeds 5,000 and then comes walking on the water at night. Next week, we'll study the feeding story from John's Gospel. Today, we begin with Mark 6:30.
The apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to Him all they had done and taught. Then, because so many people were coming and going that they didn't even have a chance to eat, He said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, He had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So He began teaching them many things. When they had crossed over, they landed at Gennesaret and anchored there. As soon as they got out of the boat, people recognized Jesus. They ran throughout that whole region and carried the sick on mats to wherever they heard He was. And wherever He went, into villages, towns, or countryside, they placed the sick in the marketplaces. They begged Him to let them touch even the edge of His cloak, and all who touched it were healed.
Last week, we had a bit of an interlude about the death of John the Baptist. It warns us that in this world, bad things can happen, even if we're doing God's work. But in the weeks before that, we saw how Jesus was conditioning the disciples for ministry, modeling for them how to handle different situations. He sent them out in twos to spread his message. So this is all about on-the-job training, basically. Now, as this passage opens, the apostles gather around Jesus, and they're telling him all about what they experienced. We'd love to eavesdrop and hear some of the stories, but it seems a lot of other people are eavesdropping. The crowds just won't stay away from this phenomenon called Jesus. In a time when Jesus is very focused on training, it's somewhat of a concern. For one thing, we know there's a tension between his teaching and his healing. He wants to teach. The people want him to heal. There are a number of passages that imply Jesus was frustrated because people didn't want his ideas. They wanted a show, and though you couldn't blame sick people for wanting this, they wanted to be well. So Jesus says to his disciples, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." The first of, for me, two big ideas is right here, and it's obvious. When you've been working hard as the disciples have, there's no sin in getting rest. It's the opposite, actually. Now, in our country, we have the Protestant work ethic, which by its name comes from the Puritan religion and the idea that you work hard to prove God's blessing on you. We celebrate people working overtime. The American idol is career. The problem is, that idea is not biblical. I don't need to say much more about that, do I? We know rest is God ordained, and like everything else God made, it's good. And when you rest your mind, rest your body, and rest your spirit. In all three cases, you need to be very intentional about it. The second big idea here is a little more interesting because it kind of wrestles with the first idea. Jesus goes for rest, but he ends up putting in more work. Jesus bids the crowd goodbye, pushes off from the shore, and says, "Sorry, folks, we're in serious need of downtime." Then when he reaches the far side, he recognizes the same desperate faces he just said goodbye to, the pleading in their eyes. They've run around the top side of the Sea of Galilee to beat the boat there. But in any case, they've gotten there first. So how does Jesus handle it? Listen, he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. I'm always struck by that verse. The word for compassion means affection in the inward parts. Jesus felt something for these people deep down, and we're told exactly how he saw them: sheep without a shepherd. Sheep are animals that can't survive without guidance. They're just too helpless. A woolly coat isn't a good defense against wolves. So, as important as rest is, Jesus puts the needs of people first, even now. That doesn't make for a neat black and white Bible lesson, does it? Don't deny yourself rest, except when it's time to deny yourself rest. It's not that this is a negation of taking good care of ourselves. It's more of a statement of just how high on God's priority list compassion is. Jesus took care of himself until he went to Jerusalem when it was time for something even more important than taking care of himself. And when is that time for you and me? I think Jesus would say, you'll see it in their eyes. God will bring you to care for people the way he cares for people. And sometimes there's nobody nearby for God to send. So he sends you. And you know what? By his grace, by his power, you can do amazing things, even when you're very tired. Maybe we should try to see more people in that light, like sheep without a shepherd. What about that guy who really bugs you? That woman who's been gossiping about you? That family member you're not getting along with? Stop and take another look, but this time, ask God to show you how he sees that person. It could be you're dealing with sheep without a shepherd. Seeing it that way will change every relationship you have. And when you become God's hands, when you heal rather than hurt, it feels good. And then you experience, believe it or not, an even deeper feeling of rest. Thanks for listening.